hurts. This is my first time," she whispered, her voice trembling like a dry leaf caught in a desert wind, and the words hit the rancher harder than the sight before him. The girl lay on the rough wooden table inside the dimly lit barn, lantern light flickering across blood-stained boards and casting long shadows on the walls where old tools hung like silent witnesses. Outside, the prairie wind howled, carrying the distant cry of coyotes, but inside, time seemed frozen. The rancher, Caleb Hart, stood motionless, his hands hovering in the air as if the weight of the moment had nailed his boots to the floor. He had faced stampedes, gunfights, and droughts that killed entire herds, yet nothing had prepared him for this. The girl, barely more than a stranger he'd pulled from the trail hours earlier, had taken a bullet meant for someone else when bandits ambushed the wagon near Devil's Ridge. The bullet was lodged deep in her shoulder, too far for hesitation, too dangerous for delay. Caleb swallowed hard, memories clawing their way back, his mother dying on a similar table years ago, a doctor too late, hands shaking just like his were now. He had sworn never again would he cut into living flesh. But fate had dragged him back to this moment, and now a life depended on him. Her fingers clenched the edge of the table, knuckles white, eyes glossy with fear and pain as sweat ran down her temple. "I've never been shot before," she said with a weak, broken attempt at a smile, trying to be brave, and that was when Caleb finally exhaled. He stepped closer, voice low but steady, the voice of a man who had learned to hide fear behind calm. "Listen to me," he said, meeting her eyes. "I won't lie to you. It's going to hurt. But if we don't do this, you won't see another sunrise." He reached for the bottle of whiskey, poured some onto a rag, and gently pressed it into her hand. "Bite down if you have to." Her breath hitched. The lantern swayed as the wind pushed against the barn doors, and in that moment, Caleb realized this wasn't just about removing a bullet. It was about choosing whether he'd let the past control him or finally face it. He cleaned the wound, his jaw tight, hands slowly steadying as instinct took over. Blood welled up, dark and warm, and the girl cried out, a sound that cut straight through him. He froze again, just for a heartbeat, then leaned closer and said the words that would define the night. "It'll be over quick." Not as a promise of ease, but as a vow of mercy. He worked carefully, every second stretching like an eternity, sweat dripping from his brow as the world narrowed to the wound, the tools, and her labored breathing. When metal finally scraped metal and the bullet came free, dropping into the tray with a soft clink, Caleb felt something inside him break and mend at the same time. The girl sobbed, not just from pain but from relief, and when he wrapped the bandage tight, she looked at him like he'd pulled her back from the edge of death itself. As dawn's first pale light crept through the cracks in the barn walls, Caleb sank onto a crate, exhausted, haunted, and changed. This was no longer just another night on the frontier. It was the moment he faced his greatest fear and chose to act anyway. And as the girl slept, breathing steady at last, Caleb stared at his bloodied hands and realized that some stories aren't about the West being wild. They're about the people who survive it. If you felt that tension, that fear, that raw frontier emotion, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are only just beginning. Morning arrived without mercy, the sun rising over the plains like nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside the barn, everything had changed. Caleb had not slept. He sat in the same spot, listening to the girl's breathing, each inhale and exhale a quiet victory against the night. When she finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open, confusion crossed her face before memory returned, and with it, a sharp intake of breath. "I'm alive," she murmured, more surprised than relieved. Caleb nodded slowly. "You are. And if you follow my instructions, you'll stay that way." She tried to sit up, pain flashing across her face, and he gently guided her back down. "Easy. First times leave a mark," he said. Not just about the wound, but about the fear that lingered behind her eyes. She told him her name was Eliza, that she'd been heading west to meet a brother who may or may not still be alive, that she'd never imagined her journey would almost end on a ranch owned by a man haunted by his past. Over the next hours, Caleb changed bandages, brewed weak coffee, and watched for fever, every creak of the barn setting his nerves on edge. Trouble had a way of circling back, and he knew bandits didn't miss twice. Sure enough, by afternoon, dust rose on the horizon. Horses, too many. Caleb's hand went to his rifle as he looked back at Eliza, who understood instantly. "They're coming for me," she said, guilt heavy in her voice. Caleb shook his head. "They're coming because they think they can take what isn't theirs." He helped her up, hiding her in the loft, then stepped outside as the riders approached. The leader sneered, asking about a wounded girl. Caleb's answer was calm, almost bored, the calm of a man who had already faced something worse than death the night before. When the shooting started, it was fast and brutal, echoing across the fields. Caleb moved with purpose, every shot measured, every breath controlled. Pain still throbbed in his chest, not from a bullet, but from memory. But he didn't freeze this time. When the dust settled, the riders were gone, fleeing or fallen, and Caleb stood alone, heart pounding, alive. He returned to the barn, calling Eliza's name, and when she climbed down, tears streamed down her face, not from pain, but from gratitude. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. Caleb met her gaze. "Yes," he replied quietly, "I did." Because in saving her, he had saved something in himself. Days passed, the wound healed, and when Eliza finally rode out at sunrise, stronger than before, she looked back at the ranch one last time. "You were right," she said. "It wasn't quick, but it was worth it." Caleb watched until she disappeared into the horizon, then turned back to his land, his life, no longer frozen by fear. The frontier was still dangerous. Pain would come again. But he now knew something vital. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward anyway. And if this story held you to the very end, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because out here, the next story is always waiting beyond the horizon.